We can go ahead and get started. We have a lot of housekeeping slides to get through, so I want to make sure we leave enough time for the actual panel. Welcome everybody to the June Marketo Champion Office Hours. Just a couple things before we get the presentation started. Some house rules to ensure our user groups stay user-focused and a safe space for everyone to learn and problem solve. We ask that all user group attendees follow the rules. No self-promotion or pitching of any kind. Don't contact people outside of the user group without their consent. And if user group members share their use case at the user group, please don't share that information without their consent. And please note that this user group is being recorded, and to ensure that we abide by the code of conduct, today it's being recorded, and if you have any questions, you can reach out to the email address advocacy@adobe.com. Most of you are here, so you're probably already connected with the channel, but stay connected with us and get notified of upcoming events. You can navigate to mugs.marketo.com. The URL is in this slide, but if you go to the virtual tab on the mugs.marketo.com slide, you can find this group along with a bunch of others and a couple of the new groups that have just started as well. Speaking of which, we have a brand new Marketo user group. It is the Foundations group. And the purpose of this new mug is to bring together individuals who are just starting out on their Marketo journey. So there are going to be 5 different sessions between now and the end of the year. So if you go ahead, you can either, again, navigate to mugs.marketo.com. It's under the virtual tab, or you can scan this QR code. The first meeting is going to be next week. It is on a holiday for some folks, so please note that these events will be recorded and then will be posted to Experience League and to YouTube after the event. So if you can't make it, just go ahead and register, and then you'll get the recording after the event. But there will be 5 of them throughout the year. And for information about the new email designer, they're going to be having bi-weekly office hours. They did begin on June 4th, so you can go ahead and scan one of these QR codes to get some information or to join those office hours. And to let everybody know, they now have released granular permissions to allow folks to have a little bit more control over what can be changed and modified within the new email editor. So for more information, you can scan the QR code that is on the right. And speaking of what's new in Experience League, there is a personalized homepage where you can go and discover picks that are personalized to you if you are using the Experience League. There is the perspectives section, so blogs and information that are written by many of the champs across the different Adobe products. And then they have video learning and playlists for folks to help you along your journey. And this year, the Skill Exchange is coming back in August. So they're going to be going over 2 consecutive weeks over 5 Adobe solutions. Registration will open up in July. So it's going from August 13th and 14th and the 20th and 21st. And they are launching new Adobe Experience Platform user groups. So if you have any information, you can go ahead and scan these QR codes here. And for upcoming user group events, we have in North America on June 26th, there is Tucson and Raleigh-Durham. There are 2 virtual mugs, and you can go ahead. The first topic is going to be how to get value from AI in marketing. And then also the Marketo Engage Therapy Group. On June 10th in St. Louis, there is an in-person mug for game night and networking. And then for our international user groups, we have on June 17th, the Japan user group. On June 26th, there's the EMEA virtual mug. And then on July 11th, there is the Singapore mug, which is in person. And those topics for that meeting will be introduced soon. And Adobe is encouraging customers to review products on G2 and Trust Radius. So if you want to go ahead and do that, you can scan one of these QR codes as well. And these slides will be distributed after the event. So if you don't have to scan it right now. And last 3 slides, I promise. A couple of new announcements. There is the activity volume dashboards that has been launched. And then trigger tokens for any activity tribute. attribute. Those might come in handy with some of the things that we are talking about today. So that's something new that has been launched in the most recent release. And with that, I'm going to introduce our panel. So really quickly, I'm Christiane Rhodes. I'll be your moderator today. I am the Marketing Technology Director for CNA, and I've been using Marketo since 2017. Carissa?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is, I'm currently a senior marketing operations technologist at McGraw-Hill, and I've been in Marketo since 2013, and I've been with McGraw for 5 years.
Hey, Jenny Robertson. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Annuitas. I've been using Marketo for about 14 years.
Hello, everyone. I'm Max Garrett. I'm the Senior Manager of Automation at Western Governors University.
All right. And with that, let's kick it off with the first question, and it'll be for everyone here. It'll be a little bit of a, everybody can give their information here. So what are some tips and tricks? What is your number one tip or trick that you have for using smart campaigns? So I'll go with Robyn. Jenny?
Yeah, I guess I'll go next. I have two, I would say. One is always watch for race conditions. When you've got a lot of different campaigns doing a lot of different things, sometimes they can trigger out of order, and that can happen more often than you might think. So something to be watching for and monitoring for in your instance. I'd also say a little trick I like to do is if you're creating a smart campaign that's a little different or you're trying to find the right audience. For me, sometimes I find it easier to create a smart list to test and figure out if I've got the right audience before I build the smart campaign. It's a lot easier to see the results in a smart list than to click the schedule tab and click that to see the people. So sometimes if I'm doing something really complex, I'll build out a smart list until I get the audience right, and then I will rebuild it in my smart campaign.
Max or Carissa, do you have your favorite trick?
Yeah, Max, do you want to go and then I'll go after?
So mine is batch when you can and trigger when you must. Oftentimes I will see things that are a trigger and then they have a wait step. And if you have a wait step as the first flow step in your trigger, I will find you and slap your hand. That means you can schedule it on a reoccurrence. It can be a batch. They're a lot better for your system processing when you're running batches than triggers.
Yeah, that's a great one. I think mine is probably a little polarizing, but I like to say don't forget about the request campaign feature. I was testing out some webhook stuff yesterday, and using a request campaign is a great way to be able to compartmentalize your testing when you're doing, more things like that. And, in larger use cases, I've worked in places where we've had really complex lead routing. So one way that we managed that was we broke out that routing campaign specifically. So all the choices, all of the different people we were looking at, we broke that out into a request campaign. So that way we could compartmentalize, troubleshoot that specific task of the routing within one little thing. And anytime we were going into update, we didn't have to update like a monster. We were just updating that little guy with all of the routing. So I like them, even though some people really hate them. I understand.
I think it's in my mind, it's kind of like the token. The request campaign is almost like the token of smart campaigns. So you can change it in one place instead of changing it everywhere. I love it.
Yep.
Moving on. So we have Max, what would you say is one underrated campaign that every instance should have?
So there's a lot of really good information in the Marketo program library. I would definitely say like the delivery management is one that most instances cannot go without. Like the last thing you want to be doing is continuing to try to email somebody who has bounced. So I'd say delivery management from Marketo program library.
Robyn, did you have anything that you really enjoyed? Like what campaign folks should have?
Yeah, I have this one because it wasn't in one of mine, and then what a mess it caused. So delete if it's deleted in Salesforce, using that trigger and making sure that's live.
And Jenny, what would you say, what cleanup smart campaigns do you have that you think that every Marketo instance should have so that folks don't go over their database limit?
So for me, we actually do clean up our database about once a year. I actually, depending on your database, I don't recommend having automated campaigns just deleting things. That can be a little risky. I'm not saying it's not right. In some cases it could be, but for us, we have batch campaigns for data cleanup, and about once a year, more often if we need to, we'll go take a look at them. But top priority for us for cleanup, we look at invalid emails. Don't need those in the database anymore. Don't need to be paying for those. We look at bad emails. Sometimes we get in some bad email addresses that didn't get a chance to bounce because we didn't email them. So we look at those, and those are obvious, like abc@gmail.com or things like that. We'll look at emails that have always soft bounced and never delivered, see if those need to be deleted. Sometimes if we really need to get below our database limits, we'll delete unsubscribes. There's a durable unsubscribe, so if they come back in, Marketo will know and unsubscribe them again. So we'll get those out of the database when we need to clean up. Also blank emails, depending on the situation. Like if somebody uploaded a list with people with no email, there's no good to us. So we'll delete those. We also look for bad data or like, junk records with bad name, first name, last name, phone. Like if everything's bad, we'll delete it. And we have things we look for, like first name contains numbers and symbols and things like that. So some of those you can't just run, you have to kind of review once a year. We'll also look at old data. If somebody's been in our database for over 5 years and they don't have any opportunities, they've never QL'd, etc., we'll go ahead and get rid of those. A while back, we haven't had to do this recently, but our database is pretty old. I'd say 15 years old. So we've deleted a lot of records over the years, but 8 years ago, we had some old purchase lists. Like some people do it, but no one does it as much as they used to, right? So we got rid of those, following best practices many years back. But one thing I would say we make sure to think of when we're creating these smart campaigns and we're running them once a year is we're watching our filters and our exclusions. Because of the way we do our reporting, we don't always want to delete somebody who was a part of an opportunity, maybe even if they did become invalid, because that's good history for us for the opportunity and historical reporting. So we also look for stuff like that when we're deleting to make sure we're not deleting information that would be useful for us for reporting.
And I think, so you mentioned that your database is, or your instance is quite old. And I think that as as our instances age, so do the number of programs and the number of smart campaigns and the number of like hidden smart campaigns. It just grows and grows and grows. So Carissa, what methods would you use to monitor and optimize what might be hundreds of smart campaigns that are living in someone's instance?
I loved this question because it also applies if you walk into a new position and you have a really old instance in front of you, which is what happened when I moved into my current role. So there are definitely steps that you can take from an operational standpoint to run your instance to make sure that you are creating things mindfully and creating things with those run conditions in mind, like you mentioned, Jenny. One of the main things I think you need to create when you are managing a large instance is standard recommendations. So like what Max said, batch and schedule everything you can. leave your trigger campaigns for active engagements. So for example, like hand raising engagements, if they're filling out a form and they're asking for a request, if they're filling out a form and they're asking for a white paper, if it's a gated piece of content, they don't really need, that necessarily to go right through to sales. So you can manage those things in your instance based on that activity, based on how important it is for your business. So make sure your batches are scheduled, and then make sure your triggers are very limited. When you have a lot of campaigns in your instance, the campaign inspector is very useful. You can see all of the campaigns within your workspace that are active and on in one location, and then you can go to them from there. So it's very helpful for just getting like a bird's eye view. What's running, how often was it ran last? So you can find old triggered campaigns that maybe haven't been ran through for a while. So campaign inspector is super duper useful for that. One other thing that I am a huge proponent of is your taxonomy. So making sure your naming conventions are on point. For example, when you're building out Marketo programs and you're building out the statuses in those campaigns, with smart campaigns, you can put them in a folder and then label them with numbers. So you'd start off with O1 as a member, O2 email click engagement. And it just helps keep things organized. So when people are in the instance, you have that clear taxonomy and they know exactly where to go when they're looking at a ton of assets. Some other quick tips, I would say you can set alerts for key errors, or if you have volume spikes. So if you have, a bunch of leads being created, you can use that send alert feature in Marketo with an active smart campaign to be watching for if you've had a bunch of leads come in, or you notice some strange activity through a form. Maybe you got an astronomical amount of fills one day. You can set up an alert to send you a notice. Notice things that I want to touch on, more like processes that you would run yearly on your team. But one of them is archiving and activating your inactive campaigns. So Marketo will do this automatically, and they'll send you an email every year or so. I can't remember the cadence, but it's usually about every year. That's what we have set up on our team. And then you go through all of those campaigns, see if they need to be turned back on, see if the deactivation was correct. And then we also use that as a flag to go back through our instance, kind of do that quick little audit, and then make sure that everything is on and off as it should be. And that is part of that second tip too, is, document and schedule your campaign reviews. So you're at least doing that yearly. Quarterly is great. But if you have things on and running in your instance, even if they're in different workspaces, those triggers are always active and they can always, push leads through and make them do something. So, those are the ways that I like to manage things in a really large instance.
The smart campaign reminder notification that I get, I am using that all the time, and it's so great because you can click the link that's right in there, and it'll if you absorbed an instance and you're wondering where is that, then you can click into it and show exactly where that is, and you can either turn it on and turn it off again, or say nope, we can have that go away.
Exactly.
When Marketo first started doing that, I hated it, but now I love it.
It's one of the best ways to see it. Depend on that. You depend on the notifications, which I hear is going to be getting more useful soon, which is going to be awesome. But, those are really good ways to monitor things when you have so much going on in one single instance.
And if you have operational campaigns that are running, so some of these, are active, in a batch email, in a smart, in a default program. But if you have operational campaigns that are running all the time, Max, what do you have when leads are first created in your system? What are the best practices for those operational campaigns that you have running to track those?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I like to do is, before I get into Marketo, is I define my objectives. So even before I'm in there, is what do I want to happen, have happen to a new lead? And that's either a meeting, just documentation. I love lucid charts, so I'll diagram things. So that's the first step, honestly, is defining what you want to have happen to a lead, especially when you have specific lead routing that needs to take place. The second is going to be create an operational program in your instance if you don't have one already. Mine's the very first folder and program in my instance. So I know exactly where it is. It is my top priority, above the fold, first thing there. After that, I will create triggers when I need to. So if a new person's being created, let's say a form submission, and I need to enrich their data with the form submission date or anything else, I will create that trigger. Once I have created that trigger, I will then right click on the trigger itself and override campaign priority and set it to high. That means that if I get a queue of smart campaigns running, this one's going to run first because it is the most important. Conversely, you can set things to low. If there's a bottleneck and it's not as important, you can set it to a lower priority. And then if you have multiple things that need to be running, what I like to do is use executable campaigns in that trigger. And the benefit of executable campaigns is it won't move on to the next flow step until that executable campaign has finished and it returned that it's completed. So then you can work in a non-linear fashion.
I love a good flow chart. So I loved that you kind of called out mapping that out. For anybody, one of my favorite features that they launched, because I do love flow charts, if you're intimidated, the engagement map little button that they have is a really great way if you're still getting used to what your instance is and you're not quite sure exactly how some of those triggers or everything is working. Just hitting that little blue button that's in the Smart Campaign will give you a really good basic overview if you're not quite sure where to start mapping that out. But Max, I love that you called out mapping your journey outside of it so you can kind of understand how it's flowing. Robyn, one question was that they're curious how about the number of active smart campaigns and triggers that you have running at any given time and how you keep that number low.
The answer is probably too many, if I'm being honest. I think Carissa answered this really well, and then that was like cleaning up. We archive very regularly because when I first came into the instance, it was a mess. You couldn't find anything, and it was just a lot of I call them dead programs. So making sure you archive on a regular basis, deactivating, and then I think is it every year? God, I can't even remember. I know it always pops up on me. It's like, deactivate your triggers or what have you in the Marketo notifications. Definitely like looking over that. I've been in an instance that no one watched it and we had so many programs that were deactivated. So something to keep in mind if you're not paying attention to Marketo notifications, something to keep an eye on. But archiving and making sure when you archive that you do deactivate all those programs is pretty key.
And Max, do you have any tips for how to manage the active trigger campaigns? I know you said, you prefer, and as I think a lot of folks should go batch versus trigger, but for maybe folks who are still triggering a bunch of stuff, how would you manage these active trigger campaigns?
Yeah, Carissa mentioned it earlier, using the campaign inspector. So when you're in your marketing activities, you can tab over, you'll have subscriptions campaign inspector. You can filter that on active triggers and then export the list. I also love spreadsheets, so it's nice to have them there. And then I can copy and paste or click on the links and then look at each one of those triggers. If I wanted to, I could also do it in Marketo, but having that high level filter view of what's all running is fantastic. You can do deactivated triggers, you can do request campaigns, batches, you can filter all of your campaigns that way. And it is so nice to see in all one area.
And when we have lists in Smart Campaigns, in order for that to run, like Jenny, what is that best practice that you have for handling lists in a Smart Campaign?
Yeah. Well, it's important to remember that the Smart Campaign list is a smart list. So you need to follow just smart list best practices. A few of those are try not to reference a smart list in a smart list. So whenever I build a Smart Campaign, I really try to have one of the filters not be member of smart list. And I do it for two reasons. One, that slows processing, But two, smart lists can change. So if you're referencing a smart list in a smart campaign and you're running that campaign today, and then in 6 months, the smart list changes and then it changes again, you lose that history of who you actually targeted in that smart campaign. So I only include member of smart list if it's an absolute business need or necessity, just for historical purposes alone. I like to be able to look at a smart campaign smart list and know exactly who was targeted at that time. If it's a member of smart list filter, then you never know what that smart list was at the time that smart campaign was run. So try to avoid referencing smart lists. Try to make it as efficient as possible when it comes to your filters and triggers. Try not to pull in more filters or triggers than you need. But also sometimes you do need multiple triggers. Data value changes is a really good example. If you're trying to take action on a data value change, but if somebody is created with that value, that won't trigger that smart campaign. So you always need two triggers. You need the lead is our person is created trigger and the data value change trigger with the data value filter. So always be thinking about those things when you're creating smart campaigns. So you're trying to keep it as simple as possible and targeting exactly who you need and when you need it. And always remember to think about your constraints. Scoring is a really good example. It's really quick to set up a scoring campaign to say, hey, if somebody is a member of a program with a certain status, I want to score them this thing. But guess what? If somebody gets merged, if duplicates get merged, then the program membership transfers, they get scored again, right? So you want a constraint that says the reason doesn't contain merge, right? So there's certain things also you want to look at with your smart campaigns, especially the ones that are set to run every time, to make sure they're not accidentally running when you don't want them to. So always think through things like that. And then always try to use positive versus negative operators. The positive operators are more efficient. So use is instead of is not. Use is instead of contains if you can. It's so easy to use contains, but if you can figure out the exact values and your data is clean, try to do it that way when you can. And if you're doing an activity, limiting the time frame is always going to help it run more efficiently. So if you're bringing in, a lot of activities are only there for 90 days, but some are there for 24 months, like revenue stage changes and things. So if you don't need all time, limit that time frame, and that will help it process faster too.
That's great. Robyn, how are you using smart campaigns to realize better performance and conversions?
First, I want to say, Jenny, I can't thank you enough. You actually mentioned the merge thing in one of the champion office hours. And it was like, oh my God, that's why. And so I use that from then on. So you have saved me a time. So great. And I'm taking notes. All of your information and all of your answers are so incredible. So if you see me with a pen in hand and writing it down, it's because you're saying something amazing. When I read this question, I read it from a revenue perspective. The BDR team reports up to me. So a lot of times I'll read something and I think it actually meant efficiency, but I read it as revenue because I'm responsible for pipeline. So I'm going to give you my pipeline response and hopefully that will suffice. So some of the most complicated programs I've set up in Marketo have been great for operationalizing, but when it comes to pipeline generation, bottom line dollar, some of the simplest, easiest programs I've ever written have produced the most results. And though I'll give one example that here recently has given us great results. We took a look at, we have several products, so we took a look at, hey, here are all the products and here are the closed won opportunities, looked at it from a cross-sell perspective. And so we identified, hey, this persona, this product, they're more likely to buy this product. So put a trigger campaign that said, okay, if this persona has this product and they hit these key pages on the website, like they're more, I'd say, higher commitment, higher intent pages, then we trigger off specific emails. And if they engage in the email, it gets an alert sent to the BDR. We've seen more like bottom line hand raisers as well as opportunities created, as well as opportunities closed won based on something like a really simple put a couple hours in a day and getting really good results.
And Robyn, I love that, to being able to use some of this stuff to identify like a cross-sell opportunity or things based on what people's interests are. If you sent them one thing and then they're looking at another part of your website, I absolutely love that. Um, we get so many questions. I think every time I've moderated in office hours, we always get a ton of questions about the API and how to use the API. Jenny, can you give any tips and if you can request a campaign using an API?
Yeah, so it's pretty easy. Well, I mean, hopefully you have a developer, but on the Marketo side, you just need to add a campaign as requested trigger to your smart campaign and set the source to web service API. Once you do that, it's available for your developer to request that campaign via API. And they can use the request API endpoint and use the ID of that smart campaign in order to request it. And same rules apply. The flow you set up, schedule, like all that you set up to make it a trigger and everything, but it's really quite easy. I'd probably grab a couple URLs real quick to put in the chat, but there's a lot you can do, not just requesting a smart campaign via API. If you have a certain program with things you want to do, you can clone that via API. And if the base program has a smart campaign that has that campaign as requested trigger in it, then it could be cloned and activated via API. There's all kinds of things you can do with smart campaigns over API, but it's really quite simple to set up in Marketo. And I'll grab a couple of URLs and put them in the chat for you.
Thank you for
Mhm.
doing that. When we have segmentations, I'll say capital S segment. I always like to say capital S segmentation for the very official Marketo segmentation versus like the lowercase s, which is like how we might segment something else. Carissa, do you have any tips for folks who are using that capital S segmentation in smart campaigns?
Yeah, so primarily I've used segmentations across my career, mostly for like region management and marketable management. Those are usually the most common segmentations you'll see set up, but there is a variety of way you can use these. So anybody just quickly who isn't familiar with segmentations, the way that I like to look at them is they're kind of like an always on smart list. So they're constantly scanning your database to put people in those smart list buckets based on where your segmentation is. For example, we have a marketable segmentation. So this has one segmentation built that makes sure everybody is qualified to receive marketing materials. So other segmentations include like people who are blacklisted, people who unsubscribe, all the different reasons we would not email somebody would not be in marketable segmentation. So we apply that as a blanket to protect every single smart campaign we run, every COE template, and not just every single time we in any smart campaign, we just have that segmentation filter built in. Money going to be marketable leads. So the other thing to do with segmentation in smart campaigns, though, to make them more fun and effective, you can build triggers based on those segmentation changes. So if you're doing any kind of like life cycle nurturing, this is really handy for that. You can also personalize people's nurture streams based on their segmentation changes. So you can, move them into different streams based on their segmentation on the back end and have it all automatically. Some other things that you can do is you can optimize your email send cadence by that segment. So you can set custom wait steps or send times based on that segmentation. And then one other thing, which we have it rolled into our marketable segmentation, but you can also use segmentation to build that into your GDPR, your compliance segment. So that's kind of built into our marketable segment, but those are just different ways that you can use them. And then you can build them out through using segmentation triggers or any changes on, their basic bucket to push them through different campaigns that you have set up in your instance.
We did have a little bit of, you were breaking up a little bit in there, but we got you at the end.
Sorry.
But hopefully if folks have some questions about what, Chris, if you could monitor some of the chat, maybe folks could ask some questions about some of those best practices, because I think one of the things that segmentations are always one of those tricky things because you can only be in one segment and
Yes.
so
Yes.
but maybe if folks have questions about if you caught a couple of the words in there and you have some questions, just drop them in the chat and we can make sure your questions get answered. I think we had talked a lot about request campaign. And this kind of question is open for everybody. We talked a lot about request campaigns, but there's also that the other kind of elephant in the room, the executable smart campaign as well. So does anybody have any best practices or scenarios where folks might use the executable campaign versus a request campaign?
I'd say, oh yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'd say from my end, I mentioned earlier race conditions are something to watch out for. If you see race conditions happening, sometimes that's when it's time to put something into executable campaign.
Yeah, and I'll say to what Jenny said earlier, if you need an API to call it, use a request campaign. Those are fantastic. Also, if you need to call a webhook from your campaign, you'll have to use a request campaign. Executable campaigns don't call webhooks.
Yeah, that's a good call too. And Jeffrey, to answer your question, race conditions are when you've got multiple smart campaigns maybe getting triggered at the same time or near the same time, and they might not finish triggering in the right order. So like a good example I've run into is we've got a revenue cycle modeler where you go from prospect to engage to qualified engage to QL. And if you are prospect and you raise your hand, we have flows. You don't go from prospect to QL. You still go through every stage to get to QL because we want those stamps for reporting, right? But we notice the smart campaigns for each stage weren't firing in the right order when that happened. So somebody might have been a prospect, and then they went to engaged, and then they went to QL, and then they went to qualified engaged, which isn't what we wanted. So we had to do some things, obviously, to make sure that race condition wasn't an issue, but that's just, yeah. Okay, good. Glad you've got it.
And I think this is another one I think for everybody, there is the results tab of the smart campaign. So are there any like tips and tricks for filtering that results tab?
I like to create different levels of filtering in my view. So I'll have them by activity. So I'll have an email filter that has opens, clicks, sends, delivers all in one view. And then I'll also break it out so that I have just an email delivered view too. So if I do need to get more granular, and I can just cycle through those different filters. I have a whole list of mine. So if I'm looking for a data value change, I can easily filter on data value change there to find what I need.
I agree. There's that list of filters. Sometimes I'll even just type in the search bar a certain activity, and sometimes that works great. Sometimes it doesn't. But when it works great, it's wonderful. And I'll also use that to find people. If I'm like, oh, did this person run through this campaign? It's just fast. I just type it in. But even that search bar can be really helpful.
One thing that took me a really long time to learn about customizing that activity view of the lead was that you can customize that first page that loads when you're looking at that lead information. So you can take that first page and put all of your relevant like fields that you look at quickly, like put email at the top, put company at the top. So you don't have to like click into the different Salesforce tabs or, if you're looking for specific data. It was embarrassing how long it took me to learn that, but it is a huge time saver when you're trying to like get into those people and look at them through the activity log.
I think another use case for smart campaigns, we do, Marketo does have the, out of the box engagement program, but you can also use, smart campaigns in engagement programs as well to transfer people between streams. So Max, how would you move people from stream 1 to stream 2? And how would you create a smart campaign to resend an email to someone who might not have opened that initial email in an engagement program?
Yeah, so with this, it depends on what the criteria is to move them. If, let's say, you have 99 emails in your stream and you need to long form nurture them and now they're going to get email 100. What I've done in the past is I've created a program that sits at the very bottom of my engagement stream, and then says send email, and then move to stream 2 using the engagement change stream flow step. That will mean, like, in that order, they'll get sent the appropriate email, and then they'll move on to the corresponding stream. You can also use certain transition rules in your streams if you have them set up that way. Of the trigger value for moving to stream 2 will be they were sent that last email in stream 1. But I really like to use programs in my engagement programs instead of just emails. They might be take a little bit longer to load, but it allows me to be more scalable with my operations in engagement programs. So if you do need to resend an email to somebody who hasn't opened yet, also be careful of opens. I work in a B2C industry, and a lot of people check their phone on iPhones. iPhone has a lot of security that will just return auto opens to you. So if you are basing things on opens, just be wary that you might unnecessarily be sending those. But you can have a subsequent program that says was not opened or did not click email, and you can associate back to that same email as a resend. Because you're dealing with program membership rather than email membership, it will allow them to qualify, versus if you just have emails in your engagement program, it would automatically skip them. You'd have to clone it and technically create a different email, although they look identical, in order to send it again. So absolutely use default programs in your engagement programs with those steps, and it allows for so much more capabilities and flexibility.
And I guess speaking about engagement, how would you structure an audience segment based on intent signals? And, how would someone exclude disengaged or fatigued leads to avoid kind of oversaturating them with sending them too much information?
There's a lot of different ways you can do that. I'm trying to figure out where I want to begin. When it comes to account level intent signals, some people use ABM with Marketo, some people don't. If you have ABM, great. That's a great way to include account level signals into your targeting. You can have an account score and use that. If you don't have ABM, you can always try to consolidate that stuff in Salesforce. You can have Salesforce at the account level read the contact scores and other things and update a field on the account, and then you can use that to help target your smart campaign on account intent. For the actual person record, you could do it a lot of different ways as well. There's always the score. You control the score and what behaviors make the score, hit certain thresholds. For us, we use the score and some demographics, and that impacts the revenue stage. And then we use all of that data combined for targeting our database. But depending on how you're targeting and why you're targeting, you can also pull the behavioral activities into your smart campaign. You can look at triggers or filters based on, did somebody visit the web in the last 90 days? Did they interact with an email? Did they click a link in an email or web? Did they fill out a form? You could pull those directly into your smart campaign if you're just looking for certain records who have had behavioral activity in the last so many days. Just keep in mind that things like email activity, web activity, you're only going to be able to query for the past 90 days. So if you need longer, then that's not where you're going to want to get that data. But there's a lot of different ways you could do it depending on what your need is. But from an account level, if you don't have Marketo ABM, I wouldn't say give up on being able to target at an account level. You can always do some interesting things in Salesforce in order to enable you to still trigger off of certain account level signals as well.
And I mean, I'll ask this to you, but feel free, anybody else, feel free to chime in. Are there any best practices regarding sequestering records to prevent them from syncing over to other systems?
Oh, I love this question. For us, we have I should have mentioned this in my like number one smart campaign, but we have one smart campaign that syncs to SFDC to give us visibility into where records are syncing to SFDC at. And if we want to sync to SFDC, we request that smart campaign. So that smart campaign controls who can and can't go. So if there's certain records we don't want to go to SFDC, we make sure they're excluded in that smart campaign. So if somebody accidentally requests it because they don't know or whatever that it may be, that one master smart campaign will prevent them from syncing over. Ideally, we try not to request it though if they shouldn't, but it's like our fail stop.
Another good one that's a pretty standard fill with your integrations is unsync to Marketo. So if you do need to prevent data from Salesforce updating in Marketo, you can use that filter of unsync to Marketo equals true, and that will help isolate them. But yeah, it does depend on what systems you're using too, because if you're using another tool like Demandbase has its own features to only limit what data can pass. And then with anything else that you're trying to, having smart lists like that and having that qualifier, instead of looking at sync everybody, it's only see people that meet these conditions.
And then like let's we can move on to talking about like attribution, right? And reporting. Is there a way to be able to stamp, behavioral activities so that folks can use that for their attributions?
Yeah, I think my favorite way to do it is interesting moments. I think they're super flexible and you can set up an interesting moment for any kind of engagement activity you want. There's also ways to set up custom interesting moments so you can really tailor it to your business needs. Like Jenny had said, it only holds that 90 days of activity. So if you want to see something in Marketo longer, the easiest way is to just tag them with an interesting moment. And then you can use that as like a permanent flag for your reporting from there on out.
Yeah, I agree. And depending on the size of your shop, I know Marketo has its built-in program attribution reporting and things, which is wonderful. The way we do it for us and our clients, it's just not scalable to have a program for every channel, tactic, effort we do. So we make sure when it comes to activity that our forms have all the right hidden UTM and sourcing fields, and we actually export the activity out of the activity log, the form activity and other interaction activity that's not forms, and we're able to report on behavioral activity that way. So it's not necessarily stamping like a field in Marketo, but it's making sure that when the activity comes in, it has the data we need so we can export that activity and use all that great information for reporting.
And if someone regarding just campaign activity, you said the word activity and it's triggering, and I'm looking at another question, so we're moving to a different kind of activity. But we talked previously about kind of that campaign that would trigger you to tell you that there's been no activity. But if you needed to keep a campaign active for a while, but nobody's gone into it for over a year, are there any tricks for keeping that campaign active even if no one's gone into it?
When we get that email alert every time that says, hey, in so many weeks, this is all going to be deactivated, we actually go through and audit that list, because we do have a lot of campaigns that we don't want deactivated. And all we do is we go in and we deactivate and reactivate them. And then they won't get deactivated by Marketo.
And oh, I'm sorry, Christiane.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, so we kept running into one that we had just too many different campaigns in a program. Like, of course, like it's overcomplicated, my whole life story, but overcomplicated. So realize that, hey, these two, if we put them together, they'll stop turning off. And it was an acquisition program type of like, hey, we want to stamp this special because of X. So it really didn't need to be two different programs. So sometimes I think if you can consolidate multiple campaigns, it keeps them on longer if that's your intention.
Yeah. It can give you some interesting insights too, because if you're one of the people looking at that list every time the alert comes, a good example is fulfillment emails. All of our fulfillment emails are triggered via API, but if nobody's downloading that content, that smart campaign shows up on that list. And if you see the same content showing up over and over again, then you need to start asking questions. Well, what's wrong with that piece of content? Why isn't anybody downloading it? Is it in a bad place? So it can actually bring you some interesting insights too for things you might want to optimize.
And I think one thing I like to do on the other end of the spectrum, because sometimes like we will have trigger campaigns that we'll only want to have for a short period of time. So I don't want that active. I don't want people running through it. And I love using the like expiration of the local asset in the program itself. So when I'm creating that, I set that time frame. So I say, hey, I don't want a bot engaging with this with links in this or doing something weird in this. So on the other end of the spectrum, I think to deactivating things or when you're setting something up, setting that deactivation automatically so you're not looking at that getting that reminder email and thinking, oh, is that still running? I don't want that running.
Yep.
So I think, is there a way around a reoccurring hourly schedule? That was a question that came in.
I'm wondering if this can be solved with a trigger instead of a schedule. Like if it's based off of a data value change or an activity, that would be my first thought.
That was my question too, is what's driving the need for the hourly? Like, is it an activity you could key off of? We have, custom object integrations, and we would use that trigger of that custom object being added to the person to, send something. So, we use that action to do the hourly essentially.
I wouldn't want something running if you knew hourly if something was going to be running, and then you knew like, is something really going to be running between this hour and this hour in the middle of the night? Maybe you don't need to have it running hourly.
Oh, that brings up another interesting best practice though. With batch campaigns, that's something we watch for. We run a whole bunch of operational data management stuff in the middle of the night, but we're careful. We don't run it all between midnight and 1. Some run between midnight and 1, some run between 1 and 2. So you can also like watch that with your batch campaigns too.
That's a really good point, because we actually have standard times in our COE documentation. So like for those like status changes, they're batched all at the same time across like that entire content type.
And I think it's also important to note that if you have trigger campaigns that are running off of something like maybe leads being added somewhere, and you have developers or folks that might be in a different time zone that are running something, you want to be careful that you don't have like emails that are triggering off of that, and then someone gets an email at 2:00 in the morning their time because someone was entering this stuff in the middle of the night. So be careful of those time zones.
Yeah.
We have about 5 minutes left, and there was, I think, a question that we all kind of bonded over at the beginning with the is not is kind of conversation. But why does the date filter in the past before need a filter? Date is not empty. I'll open that up for everybody.
I know I can't tell you why, but it drives me crazy.
Because the wording is super pedantic. So the before that date, so you have to also include that date. But
I just feel like if I'm using a date filter, then it should be assumed if there isn't a date, then it shouldn't be included.
yes.
But
And with just a few minutes left, like, does anybody have any other kind of tips or tricks or things that came to mind, even just like best practices or warnings, or like, hey, I did this and I made a mistake, so you shouldn't? Any tips for folks listening in?
I will say naming conventions are crucial. Having a syntax that you follow to name everything in your system, and this isn't limited to just smart campaigns, but it can apply to smart campaigns too if you need to understand the order. Now, Marketo doesn't do things alphabetically, which I learned very quickly in my experience. So if you are numbering items, do 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, because when you get to 10, 11, 12, if you don't have that 0, it'll actually put it below the 1. So when you are considering your naming convention, having that double digit in there, and then that will allow you to understand the process in which your smart campaigns should run.
I would probably add to be very aware of certain triggers that you use if you're setting up triggered campaigns. Anything like lead is created, or if you have like data value change on like country, and then you're triggering something like a sync or an email or an alert. Just for example, early in my career, I did not understand how they can, run through everyone immediately. And we had a lead alert set up. So when I uploaded a list and it had the correct values to pass through that trigger, somebody got 300 alerts all at once because I uploaded a list of 300 records. So make sure that if you are if you can't batch it and you have to trigger it, that you're paying attention to everybody using the system, because someone else could upload a list and also trigger that. So.
Oh, that reminds me of another one too. When you're using multiple triggers, you have to remember if they hit multiple triggers, they will go through multiple times. So I've seen that happen where you're like, I need one of these 6 things to send this thing, send this email, update a field. So you put in 6 triggers, but like they might do 2 or 3 of those. So that's when like running once an hour and things comes in real handy. Yeah.
Yep.
If you're processing system removals like a database cleanup, and you are connected to a system like Salesforce, but might not have permissions to delete them in the CRM, keep that in mind, because any change that happens within that CRM will resync them into your instance. So something that we've found, if you do want to keep them out of your instance, is to first have a flow step of data value change unsynced to Marketo, so it keeps it in your CRM. You wait a couple minutes and then you process the deletion. That way, the CRM status is, okay, we're not going to push this to Marketo, but then you can also clear them out of your Marketo database.
And I'm going to add, and it's what Jenny said earlier, but I'm going to add it again because Christiane, you said, if you made a mistake and it just about killed you, this about killed me, was don't automatically delete things. We had something that was automatically deleting specific types of records. It was like somebody that would never buy. Great. Except for like anytime we had any type of integration, it never matched up. So we were constantly trying to compare 2 different numbers. We're like, the integration's broken, but it was just, it kept deleting a certain type of file. And so now we batch it, we review it, then we delete it. It was a great point, Jenny. I had to hammer it home.
And I also, this is a kind of a beginner tip, but it's something that I always tell folks at the very beginning is, if you're running a batch, if you're scheduling something, like be sure to always check that little number at the end in the schedule tab and check to make sure, like I say this because we've all been there. You want to make sure, because you can have triggers that are, you might have things that are ors. You want to make sure that advanced logic is correct, and it's very easy. I have bypassed that. I have hit, instead of scheduling, I have hit run now and just was going through and accidentally sent things to a whole lot of people when I didn't want to. So just, be sure to check in that schedule thing and don't go fast when it comes to smart campaigns. Well, I think that was all the questions that we had today. Thank you all to our amazing panel and all of the information that you've given. There was so much. I was like Robyn, I was taking notes, and we'll walk away knowing how to do things a whole lot better. So thank you everybody who attended, and we'll be sure to get the slides and the recording out to everybody, and it'll get posted. So thank you all very much.
Thanks.